Turk likes trains, so
Okay, then.
he wouldn't like this. So no, you're stuck at your house, sir. Oh, come on. Hey, Mike, did the board okay for her to join the lines?
I think she doesn't want to join the line. I think she wants to make more than that. We want her to not make the
Testing.
the board would say no. There you don't put the ready?
So hello, welcome to Hungry for History, our third one this year. Thanks to all of you who have come in person. Thanks to all of you who are watching on Facebook or YouTube. So we're hoping the rain holds off. It's saying right now that it will. We've been lucky so far, so we hope we'll make it through another one. We do have drinks back there in the cooler if anyone would like something to drink. We also have the flyers back there, so you can see what the rest of the series is going to involve. So the one next week we're really looking forward to. We're doing a couple this year that are specifically for kids. So the next week is kid themed. It's going to be Meet the Cockayne Kids. So we have three young actors who are going to be the Cockayne Kids and talk about what life was like in the Victorian era. So we're excited about that one. But today we have Mr. Stanley Stewart, who is a longtime educator in both West Virginia and Ohio, also one of the founding members of the Marshall County Historical Society. So we're very glad to have him here today. And he's going to talk about the history of the B&O Railroad in Marshall County.
Very much. It is a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. I think when she says all those nice things, it's like, yes, and he's ancient too. So that old age, you don't escape it, and that's part of what we all do. But it is good to be with you this afternoon and talk with you a little bit about the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad and the successes of the actual railroad itself and what it's done for the communities in Marshall County and how it's moving us forward even today and the Might be a rifle in there. Nevertheless, when we deal with issues as we're dealing with today with the coronavirus and all the health-related concerns, it makes us wonder just where we are with our history and our direction, and certainly with what we're going to do in the near future to enable us to get to the next level of whatever it may be. And that's a challenge without a doubt. And those of you who have been involved with the Historical Society, you faced many challenges before, and back when we first started the organization, and there was an interested, anxious group to get rolling. And with the book that was published, the Historical Book of Marshall County, I think that group made every effort to include every aspect of society over the past decades, and the actual result is something that I think everyone was pretty proud of. But starting now, we have a new outlook, we have a new direction, and here at the Cockane Farm, it's amazing what's been done here with Nyla and her team and all of those who have worked over the years to make it a success. And without a doubt, it's one of the more unique historical places, not just in Marshall County, but in West Virginia, and including the part of Ohio that's so close to us. So I think with that in mind, I want to talk with you just a little bit about the railroads and some of the things that started. And I think all of you know, you probably wouldn't be here if you weren't somewhat familiar with the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad and the historical impact it has made on the lives of everyone who lived here and all of those who have lived here and are with us no longer. The historical component of railroads goes back, as we all know, to Europe and America as well. But a great deal of it is the result of all the efforts that have been made, particularly with one railroad, and that's the Baltimore and Ohio. And that all started back in the 50s, 1850s, as we all know. And the components that were needed to put that into place seemed almost insurmountable. We had obstacles, they had obstacles to overcome that were so great that it was very questionable as to whether or not a success would ever be made. But the ingenuity of the people who were involved, the involvement of the communities, and the communities didn't really know what was going on. They heard about railroads, and they heard that they're coming, and heard about all the exciting things that are going to happen, but there was a lot of doubt, and understandably so, because when you think of such a major task to put a railroad in place over the terrain that it had to be put into place, it would seem like a total impossibility. But the group that of legislators that saw some future in moving forward with that determined that it would not only be a success, but would be one of the greatest things that ever happened in America. And it happened right here in our backyard, and I think everyone is grateful for the fact that our forefathers had the insight and the direction to enable us to move with the building of the railroad and everything that followed. And as we all know, without their efforts and their desire and everything that took place, it wouldn't have happened. And Margaret Brandon is with us today, and she brought a picture of one of her relatives or family member who was one of the ones responsible for part of the work on the railroad. And I think she's going to share that picture with you here at this point, if you don't mind. And it's typical of the persons who were so involved and so dedicated to making it a big success. Is the microphone on this mic?
We often hear that the Irish
We hear that the Irish were responsible for the hard work of building the B&O, and they're kind of out there, the Irish. Well, this is the man that actually did the work. He's my great-grandfather, His name was John Monahan, a good Irish name. He came over during the potato famine, as maybe some of your relatives did. And he signed on with the B&O in the late 1840s and did some of that horrible work over the mountains. And he was at Rose Goose Rock that night, December 24th, 1852, when they closed the track. He was there raising a cheer, and I'm sure downing some liquor of some kind, as the Irish were wont to do. So I just brought this, that this is an actual face of a man that built the B&O.
Thank you, Margaret. I think that speaks for itself. And I think the commitment and attitude of people in those days was so great. It's hard for us to imagine today on any project that we would be able to pull the number of people together, the politicians, the laborers, and most of the laborers did come from Ireland, as you know in your history, and were almost totally responsible for the construction of the tracks. But what an undertaking, and the fact that they had such terrain to cross from Baltimore, Maryland, and as all of you know, that's where it all started. They had the groundbreaking and moved forward with enthusiasm. And the first 13 miles of track was laid from Baltimore to Endicott Mills, which was just, as I say, 13 miles from the city. And that was the real beginning of the railroad. And that's where it actually opened. At that particular time, they had, even though it was primarily horse-drawn carriages, there were those who had insight and could see the potential of having a mechanical apparatus pull the tracks or pull the cars across the tracks. And they went as far as to, there was a horse that they always credited with being always on time and moved the 13 miles in a rapid manner from Baltimore to Endicott Mills. And then there was this person who had the foresight to talk about having mechanical apparatus start pulling the wagons at that time. And even though the wagons that were pulled by the horse, they were pulled across tracks, wooden beams with steel or iron metal tops on top of that wood beam, and that enabled them to move pretty quickly from Baltimore for that 13 miles. But there were a number of people who felt that there was a great potential for that to be taken from no longer the horse, but a mechanical apparatus to put into place that would pull the cars. And so this bright guy from Baltimore indicated that there should be a test to see who is the best in relation to having the command of pulling those cars at 13 miles. So they put out the challenge, and there was one person who decided that he was going to put a mechanical apparatus on the track to pull the cars. And they had a race with the horse in that 13 miles, and the mechanical apparatus was winning without any question. They got near the finish line, the belt broke on the mechanical apparatus, and the horse went on to win the race. And needless to say, the people who were betting on the horse, they felt, hey, we told you that mechanical apparatus would be a total waste. But nevertheless, there were those who saw the need to invest in it and did, and we all know where it has gone from that point. So that pretty much started the actual hauling of people, cargo, and anything else that needed to be hauled for that 13 miles. But that was just the beginning of the problem, because when you take something 13 miles, that's nothing compared to what kind of terrain and what kind of obstacles that had to be overcome when you think of crossing those mountains from Baltimore, coming all the way east or west over unbelievable terrain. And so that challenge had to be met, and they organized a railroad company, and it became known as the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. and that was the first organized railroad in the country that was going to make the challenge to get across those mountains and do what had to be done to get to the Ohio River, and that is exactly what they did. And as you all know, with the historical component, in the year 1852, it all came to a head, and right here in our backyard. Now, is there anyone here who has not been to Rosebery's Rock? Very few, but only a few. A couple of you I know, you're probably going to try to get there as soon as you can. So, now, Rosebery's Rock, without a doubt, was a community of action, and it was a small woods community, as most of the towns were. Littleton, Hundred, Cameron, all of those towns were very small, and yet they had a lot of excitable people, and they believed that they could do great things. And they did. And on that Christmas Eve in 1852, they did close the track, but it wasn't a closing of the track. They actually completed the connection from Baltimore to the Ohio River at Rosebery's Rock. And what a tremendous effort that was. And you can imagine the excitement, the people, everyone was elated to the point that I can't describe the excitement and the success that that particular effort made for this country. And I'm not going to belabor the point because I know all of you realize the basic history, but it was just a situation that in Wheeling, they had parties that went on for weeks, according to the records. And everyone imaginable was a participant, and it was a success that so many people thought would never be seen. And if you think about the actual effort itself and the terrain that had to be covered, the effort that had to be made, the commitment to be made by the investors, that alone took a lot of thinking on their part to take an unknown project and to be able to visualize what it might end up as was a real challenge. But yet so many people went along with that, and the financial investors, the banks, and all of those who were involved did believe that it was going to happen, and even though it took much longer than what they expected, when you consider everything that they had to overcome, it was a tremendous success. So that was basically the beginning, as most of you already knew, of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, and how we ended up here in Rosebery's Rock and on into Wheeling, and we all know what has resulted from that initial effort and how many people were involved. And, the investment was large at the time in terms of dollars, but it seemed as though there were so many American people who also had foreign investments, part of that B&O effort to make that happen. But when you sit back and think about it now, and to think that was the first time ever, I can't imagine investing in something that would have been so far out as a railroad from Baltimore all the way to the Ohio River. But nevertheless, we're all blessed because of the end result and where it's taken us during that whole time period. And in talking about the railroads, I think all of us know they've taken a turn that really isn't good, and it hasn't just happened overnight. It's been going on for years. A slowdown in the rail traffic, an increase in other means of transportation everyone has a car or two cars or more. And so hardly anyone takes a train anymore unless you're going on some kind of a train adventure, which there are a number of those out there, and the companies who have them have had great success with them. But I think the historic part of it that we have here in Marshall County, they can never take that away from us. And I think the more we can play it up, the better off we're all going to be in relation to growing the community, the county, and the actual geographic area of the northern panhandle. The communities in the county, as you all know, Cameron was a major railroad town. People out there grew up on the railroad, again, mostly Irish workers when they started, but they're at what they called Tunnelton or Tunnel Hill. When they were building that tunnel, they couldn't cut through the mountain as it was, so they had to do crisscrosses of ties and tracks from the bottom of that highest peak all the way to the top and then back down the other side before the tunnel was ever opened. So it was almost an insurmountable challenge to do that, but they were determined people. And the Irish group that was here, you can't say enough about their integrity and the work that they did in pulling that off. And, when we think about projects today, we complain about the road slips and all these things, and legitimately, because we have them. It's a concern for the schools, the school buses, and all of you who have to travel on those roads and hills that are not maintained as they should be. But think back to the time when they actually had to use the equipment that was almost no equipment, and the horses and everything that was involved in developing that tunnel at Tunnel Hill, and as I say, at Rosebee's Rock, the final monument to the success of the trains and the rails. And the number of people, I'm sure there's probably no one here that isn't touched by some relative who at some point didn't have a connection with the railroad, either working, and that's fading as the young people get beyond that, but still there are most people still have some relative who at one point worked for the railroad and had some play in the development of that. This came from the old Cameron Depot. A friend of mine gave that to me after they closed the depot, and there were a few relics left, and I was fortunate enough to get the depot side. The Railway Express Agency, that company did more for moving cargo and traffic and anything imaginable. The Railway Express Agency would haul it, and haul it for a reasonable price compared to what the highway cost would be. So the Railway Express Agency, of course, all this is pretty much going by the wayside now, but nevertheless. The old telegraph station. I think you can, this depot, the Marshall County, it was a Moundsville depot, but it was the last one to really survive in Marshall County. And that's just a picture of the old B&O Railroad station that was before they tore it down. And as most of you know, we made every effort to save that depot. But because there were active tracks on both sides going north and south, they would not permit us to turn that into a historical landmark or save it for the Historical Society to have historical meetings and do what needed to be done rather than tear it down. So we had no say in it. Every effort was made. The Historical Society worked day and night, talked to everyone from here to DC and beyond, and had no success in being able to keep it. This one, this picture here, this shows the inside of one of our local depots. My dad was a station agent later for on the B&O, and he's the one here on the left side of the picture. And he was a dedicated B&O fan. He would talk down against the B&O under any condition. And it's seeing many of you in the audience who have relatives who have worked for the railroad. I know that most of them were B&O employees, and it was just a blessing that company took care of so many people and took care of so many things in relation to their personal lives, the transfer of the people to the various cities, and also for their everyday sending of messages. The telegraph key was the key way to do it. This being the telegraph key, most of you probably recognize it. The Morse code was always the code used. Then they were able to speed up the process with a faster method, and then pretty soon it became electronic, and then of course this became an antique as well. this is one of the keys that my dad had in his location at the time, and I was fortunate enough to be able to get that. The lanterns, I think everybody knows what the lantern is for the railroad. I think we all have them, and everyone has a story to tell, and I'm sure you've heard a lot of stories from your friends and relatives, know of stories from maybe your own experiences on the railroad. And those are things that we cherish most. I mean, yes, there are all kinds of books out there. I brought a couple here today, and more are being printed every day. But the direct contact with someone who's worked for the B&O or any of the railroads, giving you firsthand information, telling you what it was like, telling you what life was back then, and seeing the younger people out here. I know that you don't remember the depots as such when they were active, but it was a gathering place. When people would come to town, naturally the train would stop there. Some of them had to find a hotel and motel nearby, but it was historic in relation to everything that transpired in that depot. Tiny little station, like this one. Here in Moundsville, every little town had one. That's where the talk of the town was. Everyone came around to the depot to hear what the gossip was, carried the stories all over the place. So it was more than just a place to buy a ticket to get somewhere. There was always a friend there, and you could talk with that person about anything, almost about any time. Also, the toys at that time. This is a cast iron train, as you can see, and everything then was cast iron in the early years. But the trains, the depots, anyone that talked about railroads, their kids had cast iron trains. And the worst part of these things, the ones that are still intact, we're very fortunate. But many of them, if you would drop these, especially on a hard surface, they would break. That cast metal did not hold up well. But a lot of them have survived, and they are highly collectible. And if you have one, hang on to it. It's a replica of something you won't be seeing again, because the plastic you see today won't compare. And I guarantee you, those kids aren't going to let that plastic toy last any length of time. And I'm not saying anything to you don't know, but it's just the toys were of a different nature, a different type, a different world, and everyone had them and enjoyed them, and it's just a part of reality, and that's how it came about, and that's what it is. So in essence, that's kind of a quick overview of some of the things that I thought you might have an interest in. You can talk about particular situations with various depots, and I can talk about dates and times and places and what took place, but it's unlikely you're going to remember that for very long, because there's no real need to know it. And it was history, and it was covered, and to stand before you and give a lecture about all these major achievements that the railroads have accomplished would be a total waste of your time, and probably a waste of breath of mine. But the one thing I wanted you to be aware of, these order hoops, these things, when I go to the depot with my dad, I was always unbelievably amazed about how they got the orders up to the engineers. Of course, he'd tell me 100 times at home, but this is one of the newer types. This old hoop is just what it looks like. It's a hoop. And there's a little fastener there that enables you to put your order in there. After the telegrapher or station agent would write the order for the incoming train, then he would have to get that order up to the engineer, which wasn't always easy. So they would, with their signal lights at the depot, they would turn on, a light that indicated slow down because there's an order for you, or slow down for whatever reason. And if it's red, you have to stop. If you were the engineer, you had to stop at that depot. And if it's green, you just keep going through. And if there's an order, you pick it up. But this order hoop was simply used. You would go out and stand on the platform, hold that up, and when the engineer or the fireman, either one, to pick it up, they would run their arm through that hoop, take the order off, and throw it back down on the landing there by the depot, the platform. And the engineer had the order, he knew what he had to do, and for the most part, the station agent could take that back in and use it again. But these things are made out of bamboo and they're easily broken. So it cost a lot of money, and the more the cost went up for the railroads, the more they tried to come up with some other way of doing it. So they did away with the hoop, and some ingenious guy or gal, because there were a lot of telegraphers who were ladies at the railroad station. As a matter of fact, that was one of the big jobs for most women. If they wanted to be in railroading and around trains and the depots, they learned to be a telegrapher. They could do the Morse code and would send and receive the telegraphs. But this is one of the newest ones. And I don't know how old that is. I'd say it's probably 75 years old or older. But they would tie the order to a string, put the string on this Y as such. Then they would go out to the siding where the train was coming by. They would hold this thing up. The engineer would put his arm down through it, take the order off, and he would have it. And they didn't have a broken telegraph hoop. They still called it a hoop, even though it was a Y. But that was the way they got the order. Now, I know that seems a little bit far out, but that's the way it was done. And, when I talk with grade school kids, they can't believe that it was that difficult. They look at you like, this guy's crazy. And they're probably right, but nevertheless. So just little things like that. And I think all of you who have had relatives working for the railroad, you probably have a lot of stories you could share. And those are stories you don't want to forget. And, if you can make notes for your children or grandchildren, I think they will, at some point, greatly appreciate it. Maybe not now, but when they get a little older, they're going to appreciate some of the things you taught them about railroading and trains and how it was an active lifestyle. And every community that the train passed through, they had stories to tell. And a lot of stories came from the women at the houses along the tracks, because they always complained about the soot that was caused by the train coming through the town. And naturally, that coal soot would gather anywhere it would, if they would pull the corn, or if they would be going even at slow speed, there was still soot that came from that burning coal. And so the complaints never ended with the ladies who were living near the trains and the tracks. And with that in mind, they complained a lot. But needless to say, that was part of what was going on, so there's not much that could be done. So a lot of stories, a lot of things, a lot of history went with trains and went with the railroads, went with the depots, went with the town. And more than anything, it went with the people. The people that lived in areas that, and we lived right, I don't ever remember not living beside a train track. I don't know if that's where we lived. And it was always exciting. I don't care when that train came through. If the whistle was blowing at midnight or if it was midday, you always went out and watched the train go by. That was part of what you did. And most kids in the neighborhood were the same way. There were very few that said too much negative about it. They could say some of the moms did because of the washing, but for the most part, there was a good relationship. And overall, I think the train certainly marked our lives with a lot of things, and not just those who lived by the tracks or lived in the community where the depot was located, but in history. I mean, it's just an era that's gone. We'll never get it back. We're trying to do some things that would create memories and write down some of the action that took place at the time and hopefully will take place in the future. And there continue to be special train trips. If you're a rail fan, you'll probably, if you haven't already, you should try to go on one of those trips. Some of them are short. I know over in Bel Air where we had the group that's over there trying to preserve the park and the area where the overhang is. It's a good project that the community's taken part in, and I think it's going to be worthwhile, but it is expensive and it takes time. But anytime you're where you can work with preserving anything dealing with trains or railroads, I think you'll benefit from trying to preserve that history for your children and grandchildren, and everyone will be appreciative. So at this time, if there are questions, I'll be happy to take your questions. I will ask you to keep in mind that as things come up and you're thinking about trains, if you have questions or hear somebody say something that you think would be important, write it down and hang on to those notes, because that's something that everyone's going to appreciate. And I know the Historical Society, they work with people in a wide range of firms and various interests, but at the same time, that society, I think, will do everything possible to prolong your particular interest and help you grow with it. And we've talked different times about doing a B&O Railroad historical group, and at some point, I would hope we'd be able to do that. But it's like anything in today's world, it's so fast-paced, no one wants to take the time to be at a meeting. I appreciate you all coming out today. But things do change, and efforts are made to preserve the images that we know were important to us in the past. But at the same time, if we don't take those little notes and we don't think too much about what's going on in relation to history in general, it's going to fade. And we can see it fading now. I know many of you collect railroad items and have, and I think it's visible that you go into an antique store and you see the general things, but you don't see the specific things that you're looking for. So, any questions you have, I'll make an effort to answer. Carol?
Where was the Denver depot at?
I believe Denver Depot was a rural depot, but I can't tell you the exact location. See, so many of those depots that were in every little community, and I'm not real sure. Denver, it seems to me, was like before you get into Cameron, coming from the south, but I wouldn't say that with certainty.
It just popped in my mind. I've heard it somewhere.
Yeah, yeah, I have as well, but I don't know just where it was located.
Stanley, it was at Belt, and we had sometime, it was at Belt.
Belton.
Past Big Run.
Okay.
We had the depot in Denver, and it was Denver rates rates in there one time. But it was Belt.
Well, that's great. And a young guy answered that. That's super. We appreciate that. Yeah. How many in Glendale? I think you're right, Joe. As we were saying there, from this young man, as well as Joe and the others, it's hard to determine because every little community wanted a depot. And if a train track went through it, they made every effort, even if it was not a full-fledged service depot, at least to have one in their town. So there were a lot of them in every county. And that's why I was saying early on, in relation to that 100, Littleton, Cameron, and then the small communities, they all had depots. And I don't know how much business they were able to do, but they had depots. Good question. Yes.
Did you say something about the big railroad yard down here? I don't know much about it, but I know it was big.
You talking about McMecken? Yeah, I think McMecken was one of the rail centers, and they had a huge railroad yard there. As far as giving you details, I don't know enough about it. I've known those who work there, but as far as giving you specific information, we'd have to find someone who's actually been a part of that. Does anyone know anything about what? Roundhouse? Oh yeah, that was big. Right. Yeah, that was one of the last things to go, and I think the whole roundhouse was, they attempted to burn it down, meaning vandals, at different times until they finally decided that they had to tear it down. All right. Thank you all very much. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for watching. Like I said, next week is especially for kids. It's kid themed. I think it's going to be really cool. They do a really good job. So we'd like to see a lot of kids to that one. There's going to be some games and things that they can take home and stuff too. The schedule, as I said, is back there, so you can see all of what's coming up. So we have the kids, and then we have some more coming up through August. We also back there have a sign-up sheet where if you'd like to leave your email, we will notify you if we have to cancel. So today was a close call. We lucked out, but we nearly had to cancel right away, right before it started. So if you'd like to find out about that, it will be posted on our Facebook and on our website, but we also have an email list that it will get sent to you. So thank you all for coming, and we hope to see you at the rest of them.